While Bill has held different positions in his career, the one thing that has remained constant is his positive leadership, his positive relationship and leadership with the Jewish community. He has always been a friend of our community and has made himself available on issues of concern to our community. With that, I would like to introduce Bill Thompson and ask him to discuss his vision for New York City.
Thank you, Rabbi, and it's great to be back again. As you point out, I think I was sitting almost in the same position just a couple of years ago, having a discussion about the future of New York City. In 2002, and there are those of you who remember my father swearing me in that day. I think that he stole the show. I think his comment that made a number of people laugh, and they still come back and mention it. They said that day, January 1st, 2002, my father stood as he looked at the audience and said, you know, what I'm feeling today is what we call in my community, nachas. And the crowd busted out laughing. Everybody just cracked up. We need to be a city that continues to grow jobs. At the same point, and let me applaud the mayor for its focus in the applied sciences, a whole initiative with Cornell, growing jobs and high-tech jobs. The whole initiative with Roosevelt Island, that's important. Making sure that New York City is the high-tech capital of the country and possibly the world. So I want to be the mayor of the city of New York. I want to make sure that New York City stays a safe city. I want to make sure that each and every community is entitled to that safety. I want to make sure that we add additional police officers, because right now we're below 35,000 in the number of officers for the first time in over 30 years. We probably need to be close to 37,000 in the number of officers. We need to have more experienced officers in high crime neighborhoods. We need to bring in a new era of community policing, officers on the ground working with people in the neighborhoods. That will help keep New York City safe. More experienced officers in high crime neighborhood, and making sure that stop and frisk doesn't continue to be misused and abused by the administration. We need to make sure that it is done with the constitutional safeguards that people are entitled to. And we can provide safety and security, and at the same point, make sure that we don't violate people's constitutional rights. We have to maintain vigilance against terrorism in the city of New York. We can never let down. We saw what happened in Boston. We are targets, and we know that. So we have to maintain vigilance also. Yes, my background with the Jewish community across the city of New York, definitely in Brooklyn, is an extensive one. It goes back into my father. My father represented as a state senator or as a city council person, represented parts of Crown Heights, represented parts of Williamsburg. In my history, and working for a congressman, the opportunity to represent parts of those neighborhoods and work along with representatives in the community. Later on, to be the deputy borough president in Brooklyn, and to be able to work with all communities, and so many of those with Jewish communities across New York City, across Brooklyn. And as controller, the children in Jewish day schools and yeshivas were our students also. Those weren't your children and others were our children. They were all our children. And I tried to work and work along with committees of non-public schools to make sure that the interpretations were fair, that we could do as much as possible to be able to benefit parochial schools. And we did that. And developed a number of new friends at that point, working together with so many people. So I'm looking forward to being the mayor of the city of New York, to have the chance and the opportunity to work along with so many of you again. I've had that chance in the past, whether it was as controller, president of the Board of Education, deputy borough president of Brooklyn, or special assistant to a congressman. And I look forward to having that close working relationship as the next mayor of the city of New York. So let me stop there, and then we can get into some of the issues that you would like to talk about today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. My name is Jeff Leb, and I am the New York Director of Political Affairs for the OU Advocacy Center, which is, as the name implies, the Orthodox Union's advocacy arm. And we do work in New York City, New York State, and many different states across the country. And I guess I'll kick things off here. First of all, I just want to say, having worked on many campaigns before, that 3 weeks to primary day, Mr. Thompson has every single hour or minute of his day planned. I'm sure he doesn't go to sleep until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning at times after the late night civic meetings. So I really want to thank you very much for coming here and gracing us. Our big issue really, we do a lot of work on the state for advocacy, and the city's a little bit more limited as to how the city can help the private school community, but there are 230,000 private school students who go to school in New York City. So the main question, our big issue is for security in private schools. We're all about parity and about equality and fairness. We believe that things that, some benefits that are within the Blaine Amendment that are made available to public school students should be made available to private school students. As you know, many private schools, faith-based schools, are under a more increased threat of terrorism and attack by the extremist groups than some public schools have there. But every single public school has school safety agents given to them by the NYPD. Under the current administration, that really isn't; those agents are not allocated to serve private schools as well. There's a bill in the City Council, sponsored by Councilman Greenfield, that would mandate the administration to the NYPD to provide those safety agents to private schools. We don't think this is it doesn't, there's no separation of church and state issue, no constitutional issues. What do you think about that?
Not sure about that, and I have to be honest, and the one thing I've always tried to be direct and blunt. I'm not sure that it doesn't cross certain lines at a certain point, and so I would have to take a serious look. I'm not sure I could be supportive of that legislation, and David is a friend, but I'm not sure I could. At the same point, there are things that can be done. I think that as you look at making sure that there are safe corridors to and from school, that students are protected, we can work with the NYPD to make sure that that exists, that those safe corridors to school are there to make sure that our children are protected on their way to and from school. We look at some of the security grants that have been provided in Washington for different yeshivas. I think that the mayor, it's important that the mayor try and increase those grants, get down to Washington, work with our congressional delegation, work with our 2 United States senators to increase the amount of those dollars that come through Homeland Security. There isn't as much money there as there needs to be. There needs to be more. And it is the understanding that those grants, and there have been instances of those grants being given to yeshivas in New York City, I think we can work hard to push for additional dollars there. Those are areas that I can see right off the bat that a New York City mayor can be more helpful, can be more aggressive, can work along with the yeshivas to make sure that our children are protected in a number of different ways. I'm not sure that I would go so far as to support the legislation. I think there may be certain issues and certain concerns that we have there. And last but not least, when it comes to that, there's also a monetary cost that's attached to that. And we have to be very careful about the additional expenditures. You know, I do have a bit of understanding. I was on the board of education and transferred school safety over to the police department, and it was to try and create safer situations. When you looked at public schools, we had a number of instances where it's incidents, and it's a question of trying to make sure those schools are safer. But at the same point, would like to work with the day schools to see that we could create safer environments going to and from school as well as in some of the schools.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
My question, I just wanted to say that I think if you ask anybody around the room, I think we all support a very strong public school system, because having a strong educational system in New York City is vital to everyone's success and well-being. That being said, there are a number of issues that we have that Jeff and others are advocating for, both locally and in Albany. I know I am going to be endorsed by the United Federation of Teachers, and I think what we find is anytime we bring something up that may provide some sort of funding to private schools, the UFT tends to, let's say, not be in favor of it or not take too kindly. I mean, how will you balance, or how can you balance, your endorsement and of UFT and the issues that are really facing us?
Tell you what, and that is a very fair question. I am supported by the UFT and proud to have their support, as well as by the principals union also. At the same point, that never gets in the way of me doing the things that I believe in. There are things that I disagree with the UFT about. We're just not going to agree in those areas. So their support wasn't based on the fact that here's the checklist, and as mayor, we're going to pick the phone up and call you each and every day on every issue, or to make sure that you are in lockstep with us. It was the UFT supported me because they believed that I'd be the best person to move education forward in the city of New York. That given my background, then given the vision that I had for public education in the city of New York, that I would be the best person to move that forward, to be able to be the best person who could provide strong learning environments for all children. That's why they supported me, not to agree with them 100% of the time. And I think anybody who knows me, anybody who remembers my time at the Board of Education, I had an excellent working relationship with the UFT. We didn't always agree. And, you know, those moments where if we disagreed, I always did what I believed was in the best interest of children. That will continue to be the situation. So I'm going to do what I believe is in the best interest of children, whether they're in public schools or whether they're in day schools. So it isn't going to matter. And the one thing, as I said, I've always done what I believe is right and always taken the principled approach to things. I will continue to do that as mayor.
Robert Schwartz. Alan Schwartz from the west side. I live in Community Board 7. Currently, 70% of homeless services in Manhattan is contained within Community Board 7. And we're very much involved with some of the new programs that they're trying to bring to the community. And people themselves who have recently been placed just now on 95th Street, they themselves complain about the housing, the
95th and what?
95th between Riverside and West End. There's a public school on that block. We keep very, very close monitors. 2 of the residents in those places are Megan's Law applied to them. It's just with a number of yards to a public school. The administration is tone deaf to this. The Comptroller's Office defunded both places, and still the homeless DHS has gone through with the 2 placements. They did it over the summer where most people are away and they felt that we wouldn't complain. I'm just far from clergy to speak against helping the homeless, but they're not doing a good job. I've attended forums where the residents themselves can air their complaints. They put families in one small room. They're not supposed to put a whole family there. And there are residents in these SROs, working people on the west side, who now are living together with homeless, and the places just aren't capable of housing these people. There has to be something better in the city where you don't have to take a place already with 70% saturation and just put it there overnight. I'm asking how Mayor Thompson would deal with this.
Well, a few things. The first thing, it is first in working and realizing that what we've seen is a steady increase of homelessness and homeless families in the city of New York. A lot of that, if you look at the root cause, it is, as we look at a dwindling amount of affordable housing, as we look at things like the Housing Authority and Housing Authority developments, with an excessive number of vacancies within that, as we look at, used to provide preference for Section 8 vouchers for homeless families within the Housing Authority. That policy has ended also. You looked at funding for legal services and dollars to prevent people from becoming homeless. Those dollars have been cut back. All that's led to an increased homeless population. And the other thing about it is the lack of support. Once people find housing, once they're placed in housing, what we're seeing is individuals who wind up in permanent housing. 6 months to a year later, they're back in the homeless population because they don't have the support that they need to stay within that permanent housing. It's a question of looking at some of the root causes of homelessness, making sure that those legal services are there to keep people in their apartments so they're not evicted. It is working to make sure at the back end that we have the support to keep people once they find housing, or once we find housing for them, that we create that additional support to keep them in their homes or in their apartments. But it's also the Housing Authority where we need to do a much better job. I am in favor of creating priority for homeless families within Housing Authority, with the vouchers, so that we can get them in permanent housing. There are thousands of units that we need to put back on the market, do the renovations, get people back in those apartments, and then looking to make sure we don't supersaturate or oversaturate communities. You're hearing that across the city of New York, and I know the neighborhood. I know the area that you're speaking about. My wife used to live on Broadway and 97th Street.
Gail Brewer lives on 95th Street also.
So I know I know, that's why I asked exactly where. I know the school, I know the area. We have to, in fact, look for more permanent housing options and stop, just dumping on communities. So I would agree that, a Thompson administration is going to look to push homelessness down. And the only way that we can do that is in a very focused way, in a very coordinated fashion, and not warehousing people. And one of the things that continues to be a major concern. We're seeing continued growth. You know, individuals, working individuals, and what homelessness is. That perception is changing, that definition is changing. We're seeing more and more people with permanent jobs who can't afford rent, who are winding up in homeless facilities. Those people, run into people who are working for the city of New York in their different agencies, who are working during the day and at home, and in the evenings, they wind up going home to a homeless shelter. We have to change that. And we're going to have to, I talked about building housing, we have to. I've talked about 120,000 units, both new construction and preservation over 8 years, and that's a minimum. 70,000 of those units would be new. We have to do better. We have to.
I'll be in touch with you. Thank you.
So I have a very deep feeling towards education, and specifically special education. And there was a time, once upon a time, when a parent who had a child in the yeshiva system, who had a child with needs, who wanted to get reimbursement from the Board of Ed, if the case was pretty extreme and the district knew the family, then settlements were made, and it was pretty easy. Again, obviously there were times where you had to go to war because the public school district believed that they had a better placement, and that's their right. But then there were situations where clearly the placement in the private setting was a better placement for the child's needs, and the Board of Ed districts were understanding. They were able to do settlements, and it was great until the year 2010 when the mayor changed all of that. And now there's been an ultra-aggressive approach on behalf of this mayor to fight every single case, no matter how well argued the case is, that he's out to really make the lives difficult for every single parent of a special ed child in this city. And that's why the last couple of years there's been such a movement towards making a change on the state level in the law, because there's no vehicle by which districts and parents can come to agreements and settlements. And then even if you win 1 year, you have to fight the next year and the next year. And so if the child is autistic and the best placement is in a place like we have in Brooklyn, Imagine Academy, and it's clear that's in the best interest of the child, they have to come back another year and another year and another year when it just doesn't make sense. So what's the mayor prepared to do about that?
The one thing that I think is the unfairness of families that are under stress, who have, children who the public school system isn't providing and can't provide the service, that they're forced, as you point out, to come back year after year after year. Those decisions get made, and people wind up in court, and the decision gets made. Why we would drag a family back again the next year, and the next year, and the next year, makes absolutely no sense. That would end. I'm going to change that. I think it is unfair to continue to force parents, continue to force families to go back year after year after year. That will change. And I don't know why that policy has changed. I don't know why they've become super aggressive. I just know that what's happening, and I've talked to a number of families who have indicated that they've had to come back again. The stress that it puts on them, the uncertainty that it puts on them, it's unfair. That will change. You have my promise on that.
This is on day school students, but a lot of those day school students end up at many CUNY campuses. And I recently graduated from one of those CUNY campuses and experienced a lot of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel events that affected me, and I felt the animosity on campus towards me and my peers. Mayor Bloomberg, particularly regarding Brooklyn College, which is the campus I attended, made a really strong statement about it. Anyone who opposed any such events that were endorsed by the college should move to North Korea. I don't know if you would take the same stance as the mayor. I don't know if it was appropriate for the mayor to make that statement, but what are your feelings towards it?
Well, when you talk about the Brooklyn College situation specifically, I was involved in that. There were representatives and friends who reached out to me to speak. It was a college sanction. When I say college, it was endorsed or at least sponsored by the political science department of Brooklyn College. I thought that was wrong. What I said at that point is if both sides would be presented, then that was something else. I also had said then that if the students wanted to sponsor that was free speech and they should. And I would have been in favor of that. But to have the college or the political science department sponsor, I thought was a mistake. I thought that was wrong. And, I thought what it did was to send, if the political science department sponsors an event that basically puts an organization out that advocates for the end of Israel. What does that say to students? And to think that, you know, that your political science professor may be supporting that position. What does that say? What concern do you have about your grades and about the positions and the beliefs that you have? I thought that for the political science department to sponsor that, and I said so, that was wrong. I thought that the students should have been the ones to sponsor. I did not say to cancel it. I just said I thought that a balanced, if the school was going to sponsor it, a balanced view should have been presented. Some others changed their opinion on that. I did not. So I wound up standing in front of Brooklyn College saying that I thought that it was wrong. And, you know, other individuals who indicated that people would be allowed to present dissenting views that evening, some people tried to, and they weren't allowed. So I thought that in the end, it just underlined the fact that we shouldn't have a school-sponsored event, particularly in a public institution, that was sponsored where dissenting views couldn't have been presented, where one view was presented, and where students would be made to feel uncomfortable and under stress. I just thought that was wrong. So I think in a lot of ways our opinions were probably the same on that. You know, and yes, I was, if the mayor, and I was, you know, I did not say that the school should have had dollars removed from it, as a few other people did, but I thought that went on was wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And Melanie actually was one of those students who tried to raise a dissenting voice and got forcibly removed from the event. So thank you very much for your advocacy, Melanie.
I read about that, and it just showed. I'd read about that. What it just showed was what had been said about the opportunity to present dissenting views was not true, was not accurate. And again, that underlined all the more reason why at least the political science department should not have sponsored that forum.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think it's safe to say that almost everyone, if not everyone in the room, is very concerned about day school, Jewish day school education, the costs associated with it, and anything that the city can do to help address that within constitutional boundaries is certainly appreciated. I want to go back to one of your first comments with respect to stop and frisk, and was hoping you might be able to elaborate your particular positions. I know Mayor Bloomberg takes perhaps one extreme view. Some of your fellow candidates perhaps take views all the way at the other end of the spectrum. Perhaps you could give us a slightly more nuanced perspective that you have.
As I said, I think that what you were seeing, there are a few things that were attached to stop and frisk that violated people's constitutional rights. When you saw it, and look, and you looked at the judge's decision a week ago, the judge had indicated that the way that stop and frisk was being conducted violated people's constitutional rights. That's accurate. When you're stopping people primarily because of who they are and what they look like, there is something wrong with that. And I firmly believe that stop and frisk under a Mike Bloomberg, Ray Kelly, administration was being misused and abused. That said, and I just earlier today made some recommendations on ways that stop and frisk can be fixed. It is in making sure that there's appropriate training first. Number two, that we start to focus, when you stop almost 700,000 people as they did in 2011, more than 90% of them were black and Latino. The vast majority, when they talk about the vast majority, in excess of 90%, were innocent of anything. And most of those individuals, if there was any violation, it was in turning their pockets out, or having to turn their pockets out and having small amounts of marijuana. And they were fined, and then they wound up with a summons or with a misdemeanor arrest for that. And that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. So it really goes to making sure, I talked about the larger issues with extra police officers, community policing, police in neighborhoods, higher crime neighborhoods with experienced officers. All of that goes away to driving down, continuing to drive down crime, but also making sure that we get things right. The appropriate training, looking not for the number of stops, but for outcomes, so that officers will look, if you're going to use stop and frisk, what are the protocols? What's the training? How well trained are you? What should constitute a constitutional stop that doesn't violate someone's rights? We can do all that. And as a matter of fact, and the elimination of quotas, that's one of the things that you saw at the federal trial, as either a sergeant or lieutenant would look at officers about to go out, the reports that are generated with 250s, you give me you give me 3 250s today, you give me 5, you give me 4. That's wrong. That is wrong. Eliminating that. I want to look more at results. That the stops were done, what were the results? Were they results that generated something as opposed to, and not just a possession of marijuana that generated a gun, a weapon, a this, a that. There are a number of different ways to be able to do this better, be able to make sure it's done correctly, make sure it doesn't violate people's constitutional rights. There are a number of things that can be done, as well as letting individuals know that we're not going to tolerate profiling. It is illegal. And if you engage in profiling, then you're going to bring disciplinary actions against you. And having a commissioner who also understands that and lets the police officers know that too. In speaking to officers across the city of New York in the last few years, and I think it was best put by one police officer who explained it this way, who said to me, being a police officer, there's an art to being a police officer. That's why I wanted to be an officer. There's an art to that. In telling me I have to make a certain number of stops, you're removing my discretion. You're eliminating the art of being a police officer, and it's wrong. I know who I should stop. I don't have to stop a certain number of people because you've mandated that. And that's where you're starting to see stop and frisk being misused and abused in this administration, and it's wrong. And the truth is, the federal decision was accurate, that people have been profiled in the city of New York. We need to stop that. You need to stop that. You need to stop tying that, this is the number of, of people engaged in crime, and so we're going to stop that percentage. Stop that. If we do that, if we do the proper training, if we have an officer, when you do a stop, here's the ticket that explains why I stopped you. All of that generates better policing, more accurate policing, and then it also makes sure that communities across the city of New York don't feel as if they're somehow being victimized by the police department.
What we hear from our friends at Homeland Security, what we read, is that no other major city on the face of the earth has the kind of anti-terror security system that's been developed here in New York. It's increased tourism, it's given we the citizens a real pride in the community. If you could elaborate as mayor how you would oversee that aspect of security.
It is one of the things I think that New York City, and this is an area let me give Commissioner Kelly a credit for, they've built a strong force of officers focused on continuing to be vigilant and keep us safe. It is important, and we understand what happened in Boston is a constant reminder for all of us that we can't let down for a second, that there are those who, just because of the country that we live in and who we are, they want to attack us, they want to destroy us, they want to kill us. We have to maintain security and vigilance in the city of New York, and we can't let down. There has been a strong commitment that has been made to that under Ray Kelly's leadership. I would continue that. I would make sure that New York City continues to stay vigilant, that we continue the investment that we have made in both number of officers who are focused on anti-terrorism, as well as continuing to look at the newest technologies that continue to keep us safe. The one thing that I am a firm believer in, we have to make sure that New York City stays both vigilant when it comes to terrorism and its efforts there, as well as we have to make sure that New York City stays a safe city, and that safety and security is extended to each and every community across the city of New York. That's what living in New York should mean, that you live in a safe environment. And as mayor, I'm going to continue to fight to get that done. I will never take a step backwards when it comes to making sure that the city stays safe. I will never take a step back when it comes to making sure that we stay vigilant against terrorism.
We want to thank Jeff Leb and the all-star team that Jeff has created here, really for everything that he does for our community, but specifically today for the relationship that he's created with Bill Thompson, with his team. And of course we want to thank Controller Thompson. He's a mensch. We'll throw a little Yiddish in. He's a real mensch. He's a man, as you can see, that's not going to give you the answer you want to hear. He's honest, he's frank, but he's a man of substance, and he's a man of decency. And he's a person who's been a leader to all of our communities. We have a tapestry here in New York City, and it takes a man like Bill Thompson to be the visionary and to be the man of substance who can relate to every aspect of that tapestry. We're very proud of you. We're really honored to be associated with you and to know you. God bless you.
Thank you so much.